Thank you. Royston.
Thank you, Chairman. Foreign Secretary, thank you for coming to see us today. Can I talk a bit about state hostage taking and particularly the release of hostages recently from Iran? We've had two foreign secretaries, former foreign secretaries, come before us and talk about the outstanding IMS debt. What were the 5 conditions required by the Treasury to allow that IMS debt to Iran to be repaid?
Well, the core point is that the debt had to be used for humanitarian purposes. So that was the key requirement.
And that was the only requirement?
That was the key requirement as far as we were concerned. That was the potential issue for the Treasury.
The Treasury didn't have any other requirements, just that one, as long as you could show that it was only ever going to be used for humanitarian aid, then the money could be released, and that was the only stumbling block throughout then.
We will have to ask the Treasury if there were more requirements as far as they were concerned, but as far as we were concerned, that was the key area that we had to have assurance on.
So what conditions then, that condition then specifically, what changed? How did you demonstrate then that by paying that debt, it would only be used for humanitarian aid? Because it's very difficult, isn't it? Because if you release money for a particular issue, it still allows the regime to backfill in another way, doesn't it? So how did you demonstrate that, categorically to Treasury that was the only way that debt was going to be used when it was repaid?
One of the issues here is I'm not able to tell the committee, because it is confidential, about the precise route that we used. That's the issue. So
again, there's that geopolitics again. You're going to tell straight away, I don't know what to say, so I'll just hide behind it. Well, I can't really go into it too deeply. In other words, she doesn't know.
I'm unable to share that with you, regrettably. But what I can tell you is the assurances we received about the route were enough to reassure the Treasury and get it signed off by the Treasury at all levels.
And did you have discussions with the US government about the repayment?
Well, I talk to the US government regularly about many issues, including the IMS debt and indeed the issues of the unfairly detained people in Iran.
And what about other detainees in Iran now? Is there any progress on securing their release?
Well, we continue to press the Iranian government for the release of all detainees. And in the case of some detainees, the families do not want us to reveal who is detained. But I can assure you we continue to talk to the Iranian government, and we continue to work to secure the release of all detainees.
And then hostage taking more broadly. We were in Washington last week and we met with Ambassador Roger Carstens, who's a special presidential envoy for hostage affairs, and he gave us a really quite thorough briefing about how the US deal with hostage taking. How do we deal in general with that? How do we deal with families? How do we deal with the extended issues of when a person is taken, and how do we, what mechanism do we use to try and secure their release?
In terms of the specific cases I've been involved in, we spend a lot of time lobbying governments directly to secure the release, and doing that by means of persuasion. And our teams have recently secured the release of 5 people from Afghanistan. For example, we also secured the release of Nazanin and Anousheh from Iran. But we take a case-by-case approach on all of these issues because it does depend on the government and it depends on the specific circumstance. In the case of Iran, we had 2 very clear irritants in our bilateral relationship. Number 1, the detainees. Number 2, the IMS debt. And I agreed with Minister Abdollahian, the Iranian foreign minister, that we would deal with those issues in parallel. So that's the approach we took with Iran. We took a different approach with Afghanistan. We are currently working on various other cases around the world. And what we're also doing is working with our G7 partners on a more unified approach to unfair detention. In particular, Canada is leading on this initiative. There's going to be a conference later on this year. But what we want is more of an all-for-one, one-for-all approach, so we can't be picked off against other countries, and we have a common approach to detainee taking.
The special envoy in the US for hostage taking is the point of contact, and he will speak to families, he will walk them through the process, he will make them understand and accept that this could be a long process and that not much is going to happen overnight. Do we have a single point of contact like that?
I mean, we have an excellent team at the Foreign Office dealing with this.
So what we do, and I think we've arranged for our consular director to brief you about how the process works in practice in more detail. I'm sorry that hasn't happened yet for diary reasons, but we have in our consular director we have what we call a special cases team. So where it's not a run-of-the-mill case which just needs standard consular assistance, they'll be responsible. They'll take responsibility for liaison with the family, but they'll also crucially work very closely with the relevant geographic part of the department and the overseas embassy or high commission, depending on where someone might be held, to make sure that we're bringing kind of, if you like, the totality of UK effort behind a particular case, and it's fully coordinated, involves obviously ministers as necessary. But this special cases team will be the ones responsible for staying over the long term in touch with families.
Just one final small one, please. They were very candid with us about how many hostages they were looking at in the US and how they had categorised those, because some weren't categorised as hostages in the first place, so they have a process to go through it. Do you have a similar process, and how many people are currently deemed to be hostages from this country?
So I think we need to sort of be clear around language. So there are hostages in the sense of hostages held by terrorist groups. I think you're using the term in a broader sense in terms of the workload of the special cases.
People that have been detained and are not allowed to come home.
If we're talking about the work of the special cases team, I'll make sure that the director, when she briefs you, comes with the numbers of their workload.
Thank you, Chairman.
Just to quickly follow up on Royston, the foremost job of the Foreign Office is to keep British nationals safe abroad. So I'm surprised that you don't want to tell us the number of people. And it's not just terrorist groups that hold people hostage, it's hostile states as well. So how many British nationals are currently being held hostage around the world?
I don't have that number in front of me.
But you can see why that concerns me.
Okay. So I'll make sure that the director, when she briefs the committee, comes with the numbers.
An allied question. Gholam Reza Zihahi, who's the former head of Evin prison in Iran, which is where Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was held. He was responsible for the inhuman and degrading treatment of prisoners at the prison. He's sanctioned by the EU, but not by the UK. Why?
Well, that's something I'm very happy to look into, Chris. I will look into that. I was not aware of that.
It will be under the Magnitsky sanctions rather than obviously Russian sanctions. But
let me have a look
okay.
at that. I'm happy to look at that.
Just to follow Alicia's question, how many dual nationals are in Iran at risk of the death sentence for example, alleged spying? How many of our fellow citizens are facing that threat today?
I don't think it's helpful for us to talk about numbers of people held.
What are these people trying to hide?
In Iran, as the Foreign Secretary said earlier, families often ask us not to raise it.
Asking for how many Iranian British dual nationals are at risk of the death sentence for alleged spying today.
Pick up on private military company.
I don't think it's helpful for us to go into numbers.
It's not true at all.
I think the committee wants to know.
It is helpful.
Is it not
I think we could give you a private briefing, but one of the issues that we have with unfairly detained personnel is getting these issues resolved and making them very public, and not necessarily it doesn't help help
showing the
achieve
extent
the
of the
outcomes we
problem
want, and
does.
our absolute priority is getting these British nationals
That's
released.
not what Richard Radcliffe told us. That's not what many of the other families have told us. But we can come back
Well,
to
I'm
that.
very.
There's clearly difference of opinion here, Foreign Secretary.
Numbers. There is, but the way that we secured Nazanin's release and Anousheh's release was through a lot of quite low-key work to get it done, and sometimes publicity doesn't help. Now, there are different cases and different governments are influenced in different ways, and where we feel it is helpful, we will take that approach. But, for example, in securing the release of detainees from Afghanistan, that was done in a very quiet fashion and was successful. So I just think we have to be careful not to give publicity to some of these cases where the malign regime wants the publicity. That's the issue we face.
Even if the families would like the numbers to be known.
Well, if the families, it's a different issue if the families want to publicise it, and I would never ever second guess somebody whose family has been detained. They absolutely have a right to publicise their case. I'm simply saying where the families have requested us not to publicise it, and where we think there is a good route to get this done in a relatively low-key manner, that is the approach that we will take. And this is the discussion. I think the private briefing will be very helpful with our director, because this is the discussion that we often have internally when we're trying to deal with these cases.
Foreign Secretary, we weren't asking for names or details. We were asking merely for numbers, and I don't think that's an unreasonable question. So I agree with almost everything else you've said, but I don't agree.
I'm
with
very happy.
numbers.
What I'm saying is I'm happy that we provide that to the committee on a private basis. That's what I'm saying.
Should Iran be taken off the foreign terrorist list?
Sorry, say that again?
Iran at the moment is deemed to be supporting terrorism. Is that still your view?
Yes.
Henry?